It's great to hear from you, and thanks for having me on your podcast. Congratulations on the new podcast. I've really enjoyed listening to the ones you've released so far, especially your podcast with Justin, who's a mutual friend of ours, and in fact, related to our first question that you've left me. How did we meet? And so, in fact, you and Justin and I were working together at a university, Universidad Sergio Arboleda in Bogota. I think that it was around 2015. It was one of my first days there. And even though I don't remember exactly the year, I remember exactly the circumstances under which we met and my first impression of you. I remember that as I was signing my timesheet in the office, you came to me before we had met officially and asked me a question with the word y'all. Now, if there's anyone who listens to your podcast and doesn't know about the word y'all, Y-A-L-L, this is an abbreviation for you all for the second person plural, but it's used primarily in the southern United States. So apart from your accent, I also had this data that you used the word y'all, and I knew that I had a colleague who was also from the southern United States. I'm from Tennessee, you're from Texas, so immediately I asked you, you said y'all, where are you from? And you said Texas, and as the only other southerner in Bogota, Colombia at that time, I think that we became friends immediately. I don't know, maybe there was something that I said in that conversation that also helped you identify me as being someone from the South. I remember very well that we were the only Southerners working at that language center. And in fact, I had been many years in Bogota without meeting someone from the South. What about you? Did this have something to do with how we became good friends initially? So the next question that you've asked here is, what is your favorite memory of us? So we have a lot of memories of late nights in tiendas, of good conversations, of some trips to Santa Isabel. I really enjoyed the trip that we took with our Sergio Arboleda colleagues to La Vega so many years ago. But when I was thinking about what is my favorite moment with Tyler, I would have to say that Saturday mornings at Sergio Arboleda, the university where we taught together, would have to be my favorite memory of us. I remember there was one semester where we taught on Saturday mornings in a building that was separate from the language center. I believe that we were the only two teachers working there. And I remember there would be some moments of chaos we would share if we needed a particular video, if we didn't have enough copies of the exam, if one of us was going for coffee or something. I feel like we had some good solidarity on our Saturday mornings teaching 6-hour classes. I really enjoyed those memories with you, Tyler. It was a long time ago, but maybe you remember a specific Saturday morning. Tell us a good story from our time at Sergio Arboleda. So there are some questions here also that you've asked. How did you get into teaching and coaching, and why did you move to Colombia? These questions are, for me, are very related. So I'd like to just kind of tell the story of how I started teaching and how I moved to Colombia, answering both of these questions for you. So I moved to Colombia in January of 2014. When I was in university, just before I moved to Colombia, I tutored Spanish And I also taught Spanish for a couple of organizations in Nashville during the evening. I continued to teach Spanish after I graduated, but also was working in a corporate position and also as a recruiter for a school, kind of a nonprofit position. But what I really enjoyed most was teaching. I really enjoyed being 21, 22, the challenge of working with a group of 24 adults, all who are much older than me, all who are much more experienced than me, and being their teacher. I really enjoyed that in foreign language teaching, you can make adults have a lot of fun. And I had a really fun classroom where my students learned also. I think that I realized I was good at teaching and I really enjoyed it. But the conflict I had at that moment was that I was teaching Spanish and living in English. I had just returned from studying in Spain, and I missed the immersive environment of Spain and the Spanish just being all around you. I was teaching Spanish because I saw this as a way for me to improve my own Spanish, to have to study and to have to be an expert before the class. So my first interaction with teaching was finding out that I really enjoyed foreign language teaching. So one day, I went to a Spanish language meetup. Meetup is an online website where you can find events for people who have mutual interests. And there was a Spanish language meetup in my town at that time. And I remember casually at this conversation Saturday afternoon in Nashville talking to someone and telling them I'd really like to move to Colombia sometime in my 20s. And right after I said that sentence, I thought, well, why not now? When I was in Barcelona 2 years before that comment, I had a ton of Colombian friends. They taught me about Colombian music, about bomba estéreo, about sistema solar, about cumbia and vallenato, which are some of my favorite music still. And so I thought, after I said that, why not move now? I'm a little bit bored at work. I've graduated. I don't think this city is the place I want to stay. Let's go somewhere else. So by Thursday of the next week, I was in Santiago de Chile, and I thought, this is the place I want to move. And while Santiago is a really cool city and Chile is a beautiful country, I decided in that moment, maybe Chile is not the place for me. And so I went to Colombia. I went to Bogota, and I really, I thought it was a better logical choice. It's closer to the United States. There's at that time there was much better labor potential for English teachers in Bogota than in Chile. So I decided that I would move to Colombia. I immediately applied to the CELTA program, which is a English teaching certificate to adults and a training program. And within 3 weeks, I was back in Colombia. So that's a little bit about how I started teaching and how and why I moved to Colombia. So I'm sure you've covered on your previous episodes why you moved to Colombia. And Tyler, you're a person who has lived and traveled to a lot of different countries. And something that I think was really interesting about my experience is understanding that even though I thought Chile would be a great place to live, I really knew that for me, it wasn't the best option after I went. So what about you? How do you decide on a new country to live in? What kind of things do you look for, and how do you know it's a right place? And then how do you know if a place is a great country, but maybe just some place that you'd like to visit and not live? How do you understand those? So you've also asked me here how I started coaching. I no longer work as an English as a foreign language teacher, but I work as a coach specialized in helping non-native English speakers prepare for important interviews. You can learn more about my methodology and coaching services, past client experiences at www.omniinterview.com. That's interview.com. And I started coaching through teaching. Let me explain a little bit. So back in 2016, I started working with a pharmaceutical company here in Bogota, Colombia, to help their employees communicate better at work. I realized during that experience that my students just didn't have time to do homework. They were too busy, and it wasn't a reality for them. It wasn't a welcome challenge, but the challenge was that my clients, my students, would really only have any kind of exposure to English in a supportive way when I was with them, or with one of the teachers I was working with was with them. And so it was a challenge to me as a teacher, because I had to shift my mindset away from trying to help my students improve their English, but instead I wanted to help them improve their use of the English that they had in that moment. It's really hard to improve someone's English level, especially if they're not doing any homework. It takes hours and hours, hundreds, if not thousands of hours, to improve a common European framework of language level. So I began understanding, what is it that you need to communicate with whom, and how can we possibly get you doing that with the A2 or B1 or B2 English that you have? And it was a really great challenge, because they responded incredibly well. All of my students began improving. And I think it was at that moment that my mindset adopted more of a coaching mindset rather than a teaching mindset. So that's just a little bit about how teaching has evolved into coaching, and how teaching has kind of helped to create a different framework, a different mindset of what does progress look like. What about you, Tyler? How did you get into teaching? And I'm curious to know, what does progress look like for you, for your students? So the next question here is, what I miss most about home. So home for me is rural Tennessee. My parents live on a farm in East Tennessee, and I very much miss the sounds of the country. Yeah, I miss listening to birds, and not listening to them, but just hearing them. That's your soundscape. Bogota is a huge city and sounds like one. You'll always hear construction or car alarms or motorcycles or sellers. And I really miss the soundscape of rural Tennessee. But more practically, I really miss riding my bicycle on a greenway. There's a particular bike trail that I really think about a lot, and I really enjoy riding there. I miss spending time with my family, and I really miss some routines that I had in the United States, like listening to NPR in my car, driving to work in the morning, and drinking coffee. There's something that I just really like and miss about that. And every time I go back, even if I'm going nowhere, I try to drive around in the morning and drink coffee and listen to NPR. It's something just about people from the United States, but I think we just really enjoy driving because it is so much a part of our infrastructure. But I'd have to say what I miss most is the beautiful soundscape of the Tennessee countryside. What about you, Tyler? What do you miss most about Texas? I definitely think that the best thing and the worst thing about living in Colombia is the fact that there are no seasons. In almost every country in the world, we have summer, fall, winter, and spring. But in Colombia, there's no seasonal variation at all. I like very much that I can have one wardrobe here. I always know in Bogota it's going to be around 65 degrees. It's going to be a bit hotter if it's sunny. I know to wear layers. I know to be prepared for rain. And there is no winter. Even though the morning is sometimes cold and the evening can be cold, there is no long-term duration, months and months, like in winter, of bone-chilling cold. So I really appreciate the sameness of the weather, the uniformity of the weather every day. But this is also a challenge because as someone who grew up in seasons and have been so much a part of just the progression of time, sometimes here I forget, what month is it? Because, for example, June, the current month, is a month that is warm, but it feels exactly like it did in February. So sometimes I think the worst thing in Colombia is that I really just lose track of the progression of time because every day seems to be the same. Tyler, I know it's been a while since you've lived in Colombia, but what about you? What do you miss? What do you remember as being the best and worst thing in Colombia? And what do you love about living in Spain?
Do I think anything has to do with us both being from the South and becoming good friends? Really, no, I don't think that had anything to do with it. I think it was just our similar personalities, but I think it helped to have the connection that we were both from the South. So we could talk about different stuff from home and have similar experiences. The biggest thing I remember about Saturday morning teaching was one time I ran into a pole because I was looking at my phone and not paying attention to where I was going, and I cut open my head. I called my cousin, who was a doctor, and he said I did not need to get stitches, so I didn't. I only put a Band-Aid over it, and now I have a big scar. But anyway, it was Saturday morning, and I had to go to work. And instead of calling in sick like a normal person, I went to work and my head was cut open and I had a Band-Aid on it, but it was not feeling good. And normally I walk all around the classroom, but that day I did the whole class sitting down. And how do I decide a new country to live in? What do I look for in the country? Really, it started for me in Australia. And I chose to go to Australia because they spoke English there, and I thought it would be easier. But I chose Thailand because I thought it was a beautiful country, even though I did not speak the language, so that made it much harder. China, I chose because they offered me the best paying teaching job out of all the countries that I looked for. And Colombia I chose because at the time I did not speak Spanish, but I loved the Colombian culture and I wanted to learn Spanish. Spain we chose because my in-laws already live here and Jenny wanted to live closer to her parents. As far as a country not being right for me, for example, I had a really bad time in Bolivia. That's where I got an intestinal parasite. So I knew Bolivia is not a place I would ever want to live in. And Cambodia was also very depressing. So I knew that I would not want to live there either. For me, I base it really on how I feel personally about spending time in the country. As a teacher, what do I look for in progress of my students? I just want to help them learn to communicate effectively. So if they can start improving their ability to speak and understand English and communicate with me, then I am happy. I know every student is different, so some learn fast and some learn slow, but just as long as I can help anyone to improve their English, then I am happy. What do I miss most about Texas? The food and my family and friends. And what do you remember about the best and worst things of Colombia? And what do I love and hate about living in Spain? So first, Colombia. I love Colombian food and the people are very nice and warm. I love that there is different regions of Colombia where you can have everything from the ocean to the mountains to the beach, everything. And the worst thing about Colombia probably is the petty theft, because many people are poor, so they choose to steal, and I don't like that. They are not open and trusting because they're worried about getting robbed. The best thing about Spain is the government takes good care of you here, and you don't have to pay for health care or education, the two biggest expenses in the U.S. And the worst thing, there's not too many big things to complain about, but if I had to choose one, I hate when the city is paralyzed by protest. That's all. Thanks and take care. Bye-bye.